So I posted up a video pretty recently, of course, of me reacting to the PlayStation 5 console reveal, and it was really interesting to look through some of the comments on that, mostly because when the system was shown, it was a very polarizing look. People had an opinion one way or the other, whether it was good looking or bad looking. There really wasn't anyone in the middle who was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what I expected. I mean, if you really go back and look at it, it looks kind of like a fan render, doesn't it? But I do think the way Sony went is pretty cool because it is certainly different than what the Series X is, which the Series X went for a very simplistic look, specifically because they were focusing on functionality. They said themselves, we went with the tower design because it gave us the best airflow and the best ability to do, as they've said, 12 teraflops, right? You're going to have to cool the thing, and they decided to go with a very simplistic cinder block look in order to get it there. Well, after Sony showed their system, I really started to look at it more and more, and since then, I will say I am more sold on the design overall since it was initially revealed. And to be honest, I think looking at it, it's going to be one of the most interesting systems I've ever taken apart because, yes, when it does come out, we will take it apart here, of course. But I wanted to take a little bit of a look at the system, a closer look, some new details that have come out, and maybe even piece together how they are putting the whole thing together inside. So if you enjoy these looks at the systems, of course, hit the like button to help out. And if you want to see that PlayStation 5 taken apart here, make sure you're subscribed down below as well. So the first thing I really want to do is talk a bit about how Microsoft, I should say, is putting together their system, because that will be important since the overall look of the PS5 is a tower, right? They showed it to us vertically first for a reason, and then we all went from there to figure out if it could be turned horizontally. It is the same thing with the Series X. We saw it as a tower first, and then we found out, oh, it can be turned on its side. Both of them are going with that design, which leads me to believe they are both going with similar ways to move air through the system. So if we look at, for example, Microsoft's setup here, they have gone so far now to show us how their system is built overall, and they've given us even like these images like these that have motion where you can see where the air is going through and how they are achieving the overall cooling inside of the system. They have a fan at the top. They're going with a pull method so that the fan is just expelling air out of the top, and according to them, the reason they went with this is it gave them the best way to extract heat since heat rises. They've built a tower, and they figure, hey, we'll basically cyclone this stuff out of here, as you can see, and we'll see how it holds up. And that, of course, brings us here. These are, of course, the PlayStation 5 models. We have two of them. We have one with a disk drive and one without. That'll be all digital. And for the most part, they are built pretty much the same. I've said before, looking at them head on, it does look like they kind of just threw the disk drive on there as an afterthought. So I'm not even really talking too much about that, as it's just kind of slapped on there, and that's just how they had to do it so that a disk drive would be functional on the system. No, the one that's going to be, I think, the most interesting overall to look at is going to be the all-digital model, since I do believe that is what the PlayStation 5 was pretty much supposed to look like, and then they just had to find a spot to put the disk drive. Now, before we get into the systems, I want to point something out. This was really cool. I saw this mentioned on the PlayStation 5 Reddit, and then people started to get further and further into it, and I think forums like Reset Era and others started to really zoom in on some of these accessories. And around the back of the controller and on the camera and even on the console itself, Sony has gone as far as to do these little tiny, I mean tiny symbols that will act as kind of the grip around the controller. And if you move over to how I just mentioned the system, you can see the system. This is zoomed in during the video, by the way, so it's kind of hard to see, but this is on the inside part where they have Sony printed, also doing the same thing where they have these PlayStation symbols all around it, and they did it with the headset as well. It's a really cool thing, I think, that they have set up here. We also have it here with the camera, where they have this texture, and those are supposed to be all symbols you can see here. What an interesting attention to detail. But I guess it serves a purpose with something like the controller, where of course it'll add grip, and oh, that's kind of neat. It's also all of the PlayStation symbols. Anyway, back to the system itself. Now, this is the all digital model, and the only real difference obviously is the disk drive on the side here, and then also it has an extra button for eject. So normally we'd have power, we'd have eject, and then this large, strange looking piece coming off of here where it will accept the Blu-ray disc that you buy in retail stores. Otherwise, it seems to be the same. Now, the one question still is, what does the back of this system look like? It sounds strange, but if we were able to turn this around, it would tell us substantially more than we know now. Specifically, we would know where the motherboard most likely starts and stops. Is it up higher? Is it up lower? Those are questions we still have to really have answered. And of course, all of the ports on the back, right? Sony didn't show us that, most likely on purpose. They could have something back there that they want to showcase, like the PlayStation VR 2. If there is a port back there specifically for the PlayStation VR 2, and we see it and it's not explained what it is, then that will of course lead to a lot of strange questions in interviews, for example, and them just saying, well, we can't answer that one. So there's a chance that PlayStation VR 2 maybe even gets shown before the system comes out, or they just decide to show us the back of the system and never answer anything about a singular port. But the ones we can see on the front here, we have two. We have this USB-C right here, which is an SS, or I guess super speed or whatnot. But we do have a USB-C that will be used, I assume, for any external storage, like you have an external hard drive that can store your games. Of course, from what we've heard, they have to be loaded onto the system first, and then they can be played as normal PS5 games expect an SSD, but you can use it for storage, and that should help it be substantially faster. The other port here is just a regular USB type A. Above that is this lightning bolt symbol that might be kind of hard to make out, but it is right here. And what it does is it's pretty much telling us, it's right there. It looks kind of like that. It might be, like I said, hard to say. What it's doing is it's telling us that this is a port that could be a quick charge or a faster charging port, and that would work out really well for the DualSense controller. Let's say your controller is dying, your DualSense controller, it's like has like maybe 10% battery left and it starts warning you. Well, maybe this has the effect like phones do now, where you plug in your DualSense controller and after like 15 minutes of charging, you then have several hours that you can play, depending of course on how long the DualSense lasts in the first place. That's something that you see with a lot of phones now, where you have a quick charge port of some kind that you'll have on like your power brick or something, and then the phone can charge for like 15 minutes, and then you have quite a bit of time with your phone. I could see Sony doing something like that with the DualSense. That way you can have some pretty quick on the fly charging. They introduced the wireless charging cradle that will most likely be something they push, but if you don't have that and you just want to be able to plug in and charge your DualSense, this would be a good way to do it. And most likely, I would assume this port will also have pass-through so that your controller can charge even when the system is just off, or at least plugged in and standby. So initially I was looking at this design, and it is so strange because first take you look at it and you say, that doesn't look that large, but it's pretty big. Like, it's not a short tower of what they built here. Instead of kind of going widthwise like Microsoft did with the Series X, they just built it up higher. And if I kind of look head on at this, I have an idea that the fans, or I say fans, there's a chance there are two, by the way. At least one fan is at the top here. Like, I'm going to say, if they do have that two cooling active zones, like I kind of think they might, they're going to look to cool the CPU, GPU combo, the SoC, on one side, and then on the other, they will work to have its own zone for the power supply, because remember, that's the big strategy they have right now through Sony, is to cool the power supply heavily, because they are going to work to have continuous power rather than go the opposite direction, which is have a constant frequency and then play around with the power itself. Sony's going to do something different, which is why it's such a hard time to figure out what they have going on inside here. But we have two ports here. So we have our USB-C and A right there. That most likely is running off of a cable from the front back to the board. So this unfortunately does not tell us much about where the board is. Like, there is a possibility that the board could be this whole lower half and then this button, but the button could also be running, and I would assume that this button here is a part of a board that will be kind of changed out, as there is also an eject button on the other model that will then just run to the board inside the motherboard. so they can change that board out as they need to if it's an all digital or one with a disk drive. So unfortunately, neither of these give us a clue really as to where the motherboard inside is, as these are just going to probably run either way to them. And that's actually a good thing, because if you break either of these two ports here or damage one of these buttons, that means that it will just be easier to change out. So I kind of prefer that anyway. So at the top here, we have all of these ridges, right, coming down. And that was one of the first things I noticed. These are like fins almost that we've seen in some designs. So immediately I look at this and I say, okay, these are obviously the air vents for any ventilation in the system. They will probably do what Microsoft has done, which is instead of trying to create a fan shroud inside the system, the entire system is just going to be a fan shroud. Like, that's it. Like, they're just going to section parts off and they're going to work to funnel air through it. And I was trying to figure out if they're going to attempt to do this with one fan or two fans. And after that, I'm trying to figure out if they are going to lay the fan horizontally or vertically. And that's going to be wild if that's what they go with. So, for example, let's say the board is on the left side when we're looking straight at it, because of course the heatsink has to be somewhere in here. And from measurements, it looks like the system is roughly 3.5 inches wide. And if the board is dead center in like a cage, like we've seen with things like the PS3, it would actually be able to build off of two active zones, because the board would literally be splitting them. And we've seen that design for a heatsink that would go through the board. So what I'm thinking is the board is like dead center running straight down the middle. And then on one side, we have an active zone for our heatsink that could be cooled. And we could possibly have, and I'm not even kidding, this would be really weird, a fan here and a fan here. Now, if they want to do a single fan, they probably could do just like one right in the middle here, like just straight up. Just have one single fan somewhere up here. But it seems so strange because the air vents go all the way around the front and down. They could do one really large fan and have it so that it's quieter that way and it just cools the entire thing, pulling air up through both sides. So on one side here, you could have our power supply right below where the board is. The board, again, acting as kind of a buffer, heatsink here. And you have a single fan that is seriously just spinning as needed to then expel air out completely. That would be very, very interesting to see come to life inside. Now, the top is curved, and that's probably to deter you from just placing anything on top of it. I would say that's probably why these fins are here, but they could also be working to kind of give some extra force when the air is pushing through, as they are more pushing it, which sounds strange, directionally towards you. You're looking at the PlayStation 5, but the air is actually being blasted kind of at you. It's kind of odd if you think about it, because we're so used to air going out the back of these systems, and now we've shifted so much in terms of power and the way they're trying to build these boxes to be compact as they can be, that they're coming up with ways to cool these things that we're not used to, which includes shooting hot air at you. I also want to point out that these like fins here kind of remind me of what Sony was doing with their own fan shroud, especially around this whole front. It curves all the way around, by the way. This is a big system even from the side. So it is interesting to think about that when you look at something like this. This is from the PlayStation 4, an image from iFixit. You can see that the curvature of this kind of this fan here, the shroud that they have set up, it reminds me a bit of the front of that PS5. And look, they got a fan here, but they are going with more of a push style for the fan, and it also pushes through the power supply on this end. So rather than pushing the air, I'm trying to figure out if they could actually will pull the air out of there this same way, reversing the fan and then pulling it out, getting the same effect. The thing that really gets me about this design is that there are vents on either side, and that's kind of why I'm thinking that two active zone for cooling is still there to drive air through, cooling both the power supply and the CPU GPU combo as they need it done. It would be a really interesting thing to see in motion, and I kind of think it would work to keep the system quieter and just overall more efficient anyway. It will be really interesting to see this compared to what we've seen with the Series X so far. The Series X was just pretty straightforward. A brick, a bunch of components, and a big fan at the top working to suction air out and through the top. This is going to be a bit different. It will be. So I'm excited to see it. I just wanted to go over some of it here and what I was thinking. It's hard to say because of how different it is, but let me know what you guys think about this down below, specifically about the design, and if you think it'll be loud, or if you think we might be onto something here with the 2 active zones for cooling, or maybe you think they're going to get it all done with 1 fan. Thanks guys for watching. Make sure you like the video on the way out if you enjoyed it, dislike it if not, and I'll see you next time.